Okay. Hi there. I'm Melanie McCormick, and this is Dr. Whitford, and we are here to talk about using children's literature to teach the family unit in inclusive ways. We are very excited to be here.
Yes, thank you everyone for having us.
Okay, so our agenda for tonight, we will do introductions, and then we have a short warm-up activity, and then we will go over the theoretical framing of the family unit in general. We'll talk a bit about the family unit in elementary social studies, and then we will talk about teaching about families through interdisciplinary social studies and literacy. And then get into the power of using interactive read-alouds in the classroom and how to choose rich children's literature about families. And then we'll do a short wrap up and have some time for questions. But feel free to unmute at any time and let us know if you have any questions or comments. We are more than happy to answer anything. So a little bit about myself first. I am a doctoral student at Michigan State University. I'm in the curriculum instruction and teacher education program there. My research interests include early childhood and elementary social studies and literacy. Currently, right now, most all of my research focuses on how do we teach the family unit in elementary social studies. I used to teach kindergarten and first grade in Ann Arbor, and that's kind of where some of this work stemmed from, because I was always feeling like I was revising when we taught about families, or trying to use different children's books to supplement the curriculum materials that I was given when I taught first grade. So that's a little bit about where this has stemmed from.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allie Whitford. I am an assistant professor at Hope College, which is in Holland, Michigan, if you're familiar with that area. My research interests are very much aligned with Melanie's. I am very interested in elementary social studies and literacy, and specifically how we can use literacy to teach about social issues, and not only that, but see how students think about social issues, and then challenge and expand their thinking to consider new ideas and perspectives. Specifically, most of my work so far has been around gender roles and gender stereotypes, and how students think about gender as a construct in our society. All right. So I am going to very quickly ask you if you'd be willing to do a warm-up activity with us. We're going to take a few minutes and reflect on how you may have seen or maybe teaching family units in your own classroom. And so what we've done is we have two questions here that for you to reflect on, and I am actually putting a Jamboard link into the chat, so that you are able to, if you're willing, click on that Jamboard link and answer each of the questions. It can be anonymous, or you can put your name there. That's entirely up to you. But we thought we'd start out by taking just a few minutes to think about how you teach families in your classrooms. What materials do you have? What do you wish you could change? Some quick reflection on that. And then also thinking back to when you were a student and you were a child, did you feel that your family was represented in equitable and inclusive ways, and why or why not? So that link is in the chat if you're willing to pull up that Jamboard page, and we'll give you just a minute or two to think about those questions. And as Melanie said, if you do have any questions as you're doing this, or please feel free to just shout out anytime. We're happy to answer any questions. And we'll give you a minute for this. Thank you for your participation. I'm starting to see some sticky notes pop up here. Thank you also for being willing to share. I see, people sharing things personally, how they felt, if they were represented or not, and I appreciate that a lot. You're welcome to put answers on the first page. You're welcome to also put, we've put that second question on another page too, if you want to separate them. So that's entirely up to you. We do have a few people who have come in either while I was discussing the warm-up activity or have just come in right now and maybe missed it. So first of all, thank you so much for being here. There is a link in the chat to go to a Jamboard to think about a few questions to warm up on this topic. As you can see on the slide, the first one is think about how you teach families in your classroom. Is there anything you wish you could change? And second of all, thinking back to when you were a child, did you feel that your family was represented in equitable and inclusive ways, and why or why not? So we'll just give you just a minute or so to answer, because I still see some sticky notes popping up on here, and I appreciate that a lot. All right, wonderful. I see people still adding. Thank you. All right, if you are adding, please continue to put things on there. There's no time limit, but we did think that while we were still kind of here together and in this warm-up activity, we would ask if there was anyone who might be willing to share an answer to either question.
Yeah, I'm a former teacher, but I taught kindergarten for 13 years, and what I would have them do is, do like a show and tell and bring in pictures of their family, what they consider to be family. Sometimes that could even be like a grandpa or grandma or uncle, like maybe that didn't live with them, but I would still count that as their family. So in their eyes, what they considered to be family. And just talk about it as like a show and tell presentation for a few minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is anyone else willing to share maybe what they put or anything else, any other thoughts they're having? All right, the teacher wait time. Thank you so much for being willing to share, whether you were willing to share out or whether you added to the board. We just really appreciate that. And as you look, I'm sure you've had a chance as you've added to read some of the answers that were on here. For the first question, we had some family photos being brought in as you shared, which is I think really a wonderful way for students to connect on that personal level. We have families bringing their own books from home to represent families, and also collecting information at the beginning of the year, asking students, who do you live with, when or how do you spend family time together? We also, for that second question, had people, it looks like anyone who answered that question, for the most part, anyone who answered that question felt that their family dynamic was not well represented. We had one answer to that on the first page and one on the second. And the note also that sometimes the characters were unfavorable, and that you felt, maybe a skewed misrepresentation or not represented at all. So thank you for being willing to share that and being willing to just join in this warm-up activity with us.
So a little bit about myself and how I came to this topic on families. It really was, so I am an adoptee from Korea, and I grew up in Goodrich, Michigan, which is a predominantly white community. I grew up in a white family, and I also went to predominantly white schools. So I really felt like my family was not represented in elementary school. And I felt like, thinking back, especially, there were never even books read to me with Asian characters or anything like that. So I was drawn to this topic about families because I feel like also from teaching myself and the curriculum materials that I was given to teach about families, they were not that equitable or inclusive. They often followed that traditional family structure of mother, father, biological children living in a house. And we know that so many families transcend that definition of family. So there's so much work that we can do to do better. So that's how I really came to this specific topic for my own personal research while being at Michigan State. So that will bring us to our theoretical framing of the family unit in general in elementary social studies. So this topic really relates to Brenner's ecological systems theory. And this theory really puts an emphasis on how family has this direct impact on children and their development, as well as how there are impacts between how school and home interact with each other. So with this theory, it really describes how the environments impact a child. So the child's at the center of this framework. And then framed by the environments or systems that the child connects to, there's the microsystems, mesosystems, exosystems, and macrosystems. So the microsystem includes the individuals and immediate settings. So for example, family, school, or peer groups for the child. And then we have the mesosystem, which includes interrelations among the microsystems. So for example, like the effects of family engagement or communication from school to home on the child. And then we have the exosystem, which includes the environments or settings that do not directly influence the individual. So for example, a child's relation between the home and a parent or guardian's workplace. And then we have the macro system, which includes the cultural patterns, or for example, like belief systems of a family. And all of these systems have an impact on the child in some way. So for example, family and school would be part of the microsystem and are connected, but those both impact the child. And the child can respond to different systems or environments in different ways. So they have their own experiences within their environments and systems. I appreciate this theory because I feel like having it child-centered, and we can see how many impacts there are with family engagement in school and all of the different environments that a child is part of, and that impacts their identity and their experiences. So we can see with this how family experiences and the school experiences that the family has really connect to the child and how they experience school. And then another theory that we're connecting to with this work is culturally sustaining pedagogy. So this connects because families bring so many assets to the classroom, and children learn their funds of knowledge at home and can share those at school if presented the opportunity to do so. So this theory really, it addresses the needs of all students and allows for a fluid understanding of culture and a teacher practice that explicitly engages questions of equity and justice. So with culturally sustaining pedagogy, teachers are really acknowledging the funds of cultural knowledge that children as well as their families bring to the classroom, and it's asset based. So we would not be using deficit based thinking with this. And teachers really can foster these collaborative and caring environments while critiquing the centering of white middle class pupils. So for example, that traditional narrative of family really shows whiteness, and we want to dismantle that in the classroom. So you may, hear culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally responsive pedagogy, which also relate to this, the teaching of the family unit. But for our framing, we are using culturally sustaining because family and culture really connect so closely that we think that when teachers utilize culturally sustaining pedagogy, they're really putting families at the center of their practice.
Yes, and in addition, we really frame a lot of this work around intersectionality and the idea that we know that a family structure is one part of a person's identity and a big one. And that there are so many other aspects of identity as well. And when, as you can see from the bullet point here, individuals who have multiple marginalized identities tend to face increased oppression. So families or students with families who don't fit some of those very traditional structures may find themselves feeling othered in classrooms or in other places. And then that is exacerbated by having other marginalized identities based on race, based on gender, based on even class. And so one argument that we bring forward here is that individuals that stray from this kind of normalized or presumed white, cisgender, heterosexual, middle-class norm are by degrees marginalized. And the greater the degree of difference or the more identities that have been marginalized intersecting and working together can create increased marginalization and oppression and discrimination. None of the things that our slide before supports, right? All of these things that would directly contradict that culturally sustaining pedagogy that we want to see in our classrooms. And educators are often, they don't feel equipped to support students' complex and unique identities. And they may therefore address identities in ways that are narrow or ineffective. And I think we even saw in our warm-up saying, you know what, I didn't feel represented, my family didn't feel represented. And sometimes when it was represented, it was misrepresented or represented in a negative way. This demonstrates the importance of understanding and affirming students' different, varied, intersectional, complex identities as the unique people that they are, and that includes their family structure.
Okay, so now we are going to talk a bit about the family unit, and I'll share some of the research that I have been doing the past couple years with this unit. So the family unit is often taught in elementary social studies, and it is taught in first grade in the state of Michigan due to the expanding communities approach. So with that, they learn about themselves and then their families, their school community, their local community, state, national, international. So it just expands out, and you'll often see a lot of curriculum materials following this approach still. So there's really this large gap in research on how to teach the family unit or how it is even taught in classrooms, which to me at first, when I began this journey with this topic, I was like pretty shocked about it because, teaching about families when I was teaching elementary school, and I'm sure Allie feels the same way, it was just something that was so important to my practice and part of what we did in social studies or what we did just informally. So I'm really trying to fill this gap in research, and Allie's helping me do that with her work as well. And there's really there's a lack of professional development opportunities to teach social studies in general in elementary, but more specifically the family unit. So I interviewed some teachers, some first grade teachers in the state of Michigan, and each of the teachers expressed that they had never been offered professional development to teach about families, or to even just teach, or to engage with families in culturally relevant, responsive, or sustaining ways. And the lack of social studies in general, professional development, that was something that they really expressed as well. They were talking about how most of their professional development centered around standardized testing, new technology, and things like that, but never really dug into content that's so important, especially since this is a topic that can be taught in harmful ways, even if that's not the intent. And then another finding I did a content analysis of popular curriculum materials throughout the state of Michigan. And these curriculum materials really did not display diverse family structures and experiences overall. And I was noticing that that traditional family structure continued to show up, whether that was in the books that were chosen to read alongside the curriculum, or the photos that we're going with, or the activities. There was some diversity in race, but for example, a picture that was featured in curriculum materials would feature like an all Asian family, but that still followed that traditional structure of mother, father, and biological children. So there was some diversity with racial identity, but not really structurally. And from interviewing those teachers, I also found that teachers supplement this unit with children's literature. So many of the teachers expressed that the curriculum materials that they were using had books that were out of print, so they would have to supplement the curriculum. Or they found that the books that were being offered through the curriculum materials were not, representative of the children in their classroom. So they felt like they could supplement this with some children's books. And with this, we know that interactive read-alouds, which we'll get more into, they show promise in increasing content knowledge in social studies and literacy. So it is a really good teacher move to supplement with children's literature. And then teachers informally teach about families in the classroom all the time. So from community building exercises, they were explaining, from just relationship building, just different read-alouds that are not tied to social studies. They're always bringing in this topic of families. And then we also found that there's opportunities to use interdisciplinary learning with literacy to drive this teaching of the family unit. And teachers express this as well through writing activities and different projects that they would offer their students. And then my next study, I decided that I wanted to hear from families themselves, including children. So I interviewed caregivers and then their children who were rising first, second, and third graders about what they knew about families. And then for the caregivers, I wanted to really learn about how they understood how families were being taught to their children at school, as well as how they teach about diverse families at home. So families really expressed not knowing fully what was being taught to their child in classrooms. I was getting a lot of responses like, oh, I'm not sure. Oh, I don't know. Or like, I think this, but maybe not. I'm not entirely sure because I haven't heard. So they were guessing that the basic understandings of families were taught in school because kids were bringing home drawings of families or just very general things, or their children would talk about, like, our family loves us, or we're grateful for our family, and things like that. So it just seemed like it was more surface level learning about families. And then the caregivers also expressed children still bringing home Mother's Day and Father's Day gifts. And this, for some of the families that I interviewed, their families did not follow that traditional structure. So they found this problematic because they felt like it was not an inclusive practice for their children at school. And then Caregivers from historically marginalized racial populations all express that race connected to how their children learn about families at school. So that's where we started really seeing this intersectionality of how racial identity does impact family experience and how children learn about families and how they feel included in what they do learn about families at school. And when I was interviewing the children, one of the first tasks I asked them to complete was draw a family. And that's all I said. I did not say draw your family or draw a family that's different than yours. I just said draw a family. And even though many of the children did not follow that traditional structure of a family, all 5 children, they ended up drawing a traditional family. And so I found that really interesting. And they were from various grade levels as well. So we had rising first, second, and third graders in the study. So it was really interesting that they all still drew a mother, father, and most of them 2 children. And when I was asking more questions about what they understand about families and family diversity, they really were talking about how families are different by the amount of kids that a family has. So a lot of the kids were saying like, well, some families have 2 kids, or some families have or some of my friends have a sister and I don't have a sister. So they were really differentiating based on the number of children in the household. So from that study, I really found that there's a need for more family engagement with families on what is being taught about families, and also bringing families into the classroom to teach about their experiences as well, since they have so many diverse experiences and so much knowledge to share. And we really need to diversify how we're teaching children about families in school, which will lead to my next study. Okay. And now we are going to get into teaching about families through interdisciplinary social studies and literacy. So interdisciplinary social studies and literacy can really create authentic learning opportunities for children in the classroom. And using children's literature to drive that learning can really improve the learning of social studies content. So there are so many opportunities to combine both social studies and literacy. And sometimes we feel like, content is so siloed in the classroom, but we can, what I've found is teachers really are teaching in interdisciplinary ways, and they may just not know it. They may not really feel that they're doing that, but they're really still driving literacy content when they're writing about, having kids write about families, or do an oral history project, or just with Read-Alouds, you are doing oral comprehension with that and listening comprehension. And there's just so many connections that can be made, and it can really drive that understanding of the content, as well as improve their literacy skills as well. And this one study, there are some problems with this study, but it found that social studies is the only subject area with a clear positive and statistically significant effect on reading improvement. So I found that was interesting. And although it's not the perfect study, it shows that there's promise, and it shows that, with interdisciplinary learning, we really can drive literacy content as well. So through interdisciplinary learning, we can focus on multiple perspectives, and that can help students feel belonging, agency, and shape their identities in authentic ways. And that is so important, especially when we're connecting to learning about families, because children don't want to feel not included in the learning because, they never see their family represented in a certain way. Or we also want children to feel like they can share about their family experiences in the classroom and feel like they're in a safe place to do that. Also, we want children to be able to shape their identities personally in authentic ways. So for me personally, when I was in school, I always wanted to just hide that I was adopted, because I was the only person who was adopted, and I was the only Asian American in my grade level. And I was often asked by my teachers to present on my adoption. And I was like so shy then that it made me very, very uncomfortable. So it made me really want to just like assimilate to being white and not Korean. And it made me really reject all of the opportunities to learn about being Korean that were offered to me by my family, because I was just like, no, I don't want to be different here, because I just lacked that representation in school settings. And I know it was also a different time, but still, I wish that if I could go back, that I would have seen representation of my family and not felt like such an outlier. So yeah.
Do you do you think that if you had those representation experiences at a younger age, by the time you got to adolescence, you wouldn't have felt so self-conscious of it?
I do, because, you know, when I was like, the amount of times I was asked to like present on Korea or present on my adoption, and like I didn't have the cultural knowledge to present on Korea because I just refused everything because I didn't want to be different. And it really wasn't until I taught in a school with a large population of Korean students that I started really feeling like the sense of belonging to my Korean identity. And it really wasn't until I was a teacher that I began to really understand my identity as an Asian American woman and understand, you know, my identity as an adoptee as well. And I feel like if I would have been presented opportunities where it didn't feel so like, oh, look at Melanie, like she was adopted and like, let's, you know, like put her on the spotlight in front of everyone. And it always felt kind of random too. Like we weren't really learning about families. It's like, well, Melanie can present on her adoption. And I feel like if it would have been more authentic, then it wouldn't have felt so like pressured for me. And I think I would have owned it more and wanted to as well. And yeah, I just feel like representation is just so vital for children, even if it's like they just see themselves in the text, but it's like not called out on them as well. Like as long as like they're seeing, you know, a family that looks like theirs or like their racial identity or gender identity represented, I think it's really important. Mm-hmm. And so we also know that students can really draw those personal connections through literacy, like the interactive read-alouds and writing activities and all different types of interdisciplinary learning. So also interdisciplinary learning can impact the development of students' skills to participate in a democratic society, which connects to all of the social studies standards. And writing about content can improve learning in social studies. And I think through this unit, you can really, really utilize a lot of writing activities, whether they're telling stories or, you know, giving facts about their family, things like that can just improve their understanding. The unit that I'm planning for my dissertation is really around how can we be inclusive to families. So I want them to write about inclusivity and how to welcome families and things like that. So I'm going to take it a little bit of a different route and we'll see how that goes. Another thing is project-based learning can be really utilized to drive this understanding of social studies content as well as literacy and other domains. So how do you use interdisciplinary instruction to teach the family unit? There's lots of examples. A few that we pulled out: project-based learning, doing oral history projects, engaging families. You can have students write interview questions and invite family members to come in and they can interview them. That would be such a nice tie to social studies content. You can invite guest speakers in. And I know when I taught, we had many different family guest speakers, and it was really exciting for the children as well, for the child of the family presenting, as well as all the other children, because they got to know other families in the classroom. And then interactive read-alouds, of course, and writing projects. And you can even tie in some geography here, like mapping, like where are our families from, and doing activities like that. So there's lots of different ways to tie into the different domains of the C3 framework.
And one thing we are also very focused on when it comes to this research is, as Melanie said, interdisciplinary social studies and literacy. One of the really powerful tools is an interactive read aloud. Many of you may be familiar with Bishop's piece, Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Glass Doors, which asserts that every child needs to make sure that they can see themselves in literature, and that's the mirror, but also they can see other people's experiences as well, and that's that window for them. And that we don't want any group of children who are really exclusively having mirrors in the classroom, although this is unfortunately what has often happened in history, right? White children have had so many mirrors, and that children of color have not had them seen themselves represented in the same way, and then not had those windows. Children's diverse identities must be represented in classrooms in ways that are equitable and inclusive. So we should be seeing those mirrors, and we should be seeing those windows to see all different kinds of experiences. And this is a great quote. Students must see themselves in text, including their cultures, identities, interests, experiences, desires, and future selves. Text should teach multiple ideologies and perspectives. So there again, we're getting to that more complex way of honoring students' identities in all aspects. Teachers do often supplement the family unit with children's literature. As Melanie shared earlier, this is a great way to bring in new perspectives and new narratives into the classroom, because as we discussed, the curriculum is not well set up to do that in and of itself throughout most curriculum materials. Interactive read-alouds have shown a lot of promise in increasing the content knowledge of social studies and allowing students to learn the actual different subject matter, such as social studies concepts, and they also support literacy skills. So students become stronger readers and develop their literacy skills through these interactive read-alouds, while also deepening their knowledge of the content. So we have this really fantastic video. We won't play the entire thing, but we thought we'd play you a very quick clip of this particular TED Talk that will give you a glimpse into mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors.
I'm going to play it on YouTube.
I'm gonna bet that one of the first things you did today was to look out the window. Maybe you looked just to check the weather. Maybe you looked to see the sun. But what you really saw was the world. That's what a book does. A book can show you the world. But here's the thing about your window. When the light hits it just right, you don't just see the world outside. You can also see your reflection. So the window becomes a mirror. That's also what a book does. A book can show you the world, but it can also show you a reflection of yourself. But what happens if you never see anyone in a book that looks like you? When I was a child, there were two things everyone knew about me. One was that I loved books, and the other was that I was Asian. Everyone knew I was Asian because, well, look at me. My family was one of the few Asian families in our town. So that meant that except for my sisters, I was the only Asian girl in my elementary school. and I did not like that. I decided early on that I was just going to pretend that I wasn't Asian. I refused to learn Chinese, I ate McDonald's, and I curled my hair. I remember in 3rd grade, I was walking down the street and I saw my reflection in a store window. And I said, there's a Chinese girl there. And then I thought, oh, wait, that's me. I had spent so much time pretending that I wasn't Asian that I really did forget that I was. And in a lot of ways, it was really easy to forget. It seemed like there was nobody that looked like me anywhere. There was nobody that looked like me in school. There was nobody that looked like me in the movies. There was nobody that looked like me on TV or in the magazines. And most importantly, there was nobody that looked like me in the books that I loved. In fact, the only book I ever saw with an Asian person in it was this one. One day, my elementary school librarian took this book out and she said, today we're going to read The 5 Chinese Brothers. And all of my classmates turned to me and said, oh, Chinese, just like you. Have you ever been horrified by your own reflection in a mirror? Because that is how I felt every time I was reminded of my ethnicity. In 5th grade, my class decided to put on the play Return to Oz. And all the girls wanted to be Dorothy, me included. So all the girls, every day at recess, all the girls who wanted to be Dorothy would stand in a circle and we would all sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow over and over again, practicing for the audition. Until on the day of the audition, I turned to the girl next to me and I said, today is the audition. Do you think they might choose me to be Dorothy? And she looked at me and she said, but you can't be Dorothy. Dorothy's not Chinese. And when she said this, I felt so stupid. It was that horrible embarrassment where you get hot and red and sticky, as if even your skin is crying tiny, boiling tears. It's that feeling when someone says to you, who do you think you are? And you feel like you're nobody. I felt like I was nobody. I felt like I could never be Dorothy. I could never be anyone important like that.
Great. Thank you for listening to this video with us. It just does such a powerful job of describing the feeling that we're talking about, that importance of students having those windows, but also having those mirrors, and mirrors that are thoughtful and mirrors that are rich and mirrors that actually connect with students in a meaningful way. And you could see in that example, the one book that was brought into the classroom that she felt did not, and she said, I think she even used the word horrified, at her reflection that was provided. And so we're going to talk to you a little bit about choosing rich children's literature, and ensuring to the best of your ability that you are, that we are all bringing in books that represent students and they connect with in a meaningful way. And so one thing we'll share with you here is Goalie Muhammad's historically responsive literacy framework. And there are 4 elements to this that can be used as a guide for you as you're choosing children's literature to bring into the classroom. And one, as you can see, is identity. And that's asking the question of how does the curriculum, including the texts, help students to learn something about themselves and or others? So we're looking at those windows. How can we use, and those mirrors, how can students connect authentically and see their own experiences and learn about themselves? And then also, how are they learning about others? The second is skills. How does the curriculum, including the text that you read with your students or provide for them to read, respond to or build students' skills and standards? What are they learning in terms of the skills and their abilities in the classroom? The third is intellect. How does the curriculum respond to or build upon students' knowledge and mental powers? What are they becoming smarter about? And this is such an important one. I know, as you all know, understanding what your students are, what funds of knowledge they're bringing in, and meeting them there and building and helping them continue to grow. And that's an important question to ask yourself when you're choosing a book for your classroom. What are they becoming smarter about? Where are we growing? And the last is criticality. How does that curriculum, including those texts you might bring into your classroom, engage students thinking about power and equity and the disruption of oppression? So these are the big picture, really important questions that you can engage students in terms of thinking critically about the world around them through literature and through texts.
So using this framework, some questions that Mohammed ask teachers to ask themselves are, what are the histories of students in your class? And you can think about, what are their family histories? And who are your students? Whom do they say they are? Who do others say they are? Whom do they desire to be? And this is so important in connecting to that family unit as well. And then how do the students' histories, identities, and literacies compare to your own? So do you connect with their family experiences in any ways? If you don't, what can you do to inform yourself on their family experiences or structures so that you can better connect to them? And Mohammed also has some different questions to think about when you're choosing texts or thinking about, we can connect this to the family unit in so many ways because these questions are so broad. So like, what is worthwhile for learning in my content area? Or what is worthwhile for learning about families? Why did I choose this text to teach with? How have my students contributed to the selection of texts for teaching and learning? So that's something too. You could ask children to bring in their own books, like someone mentioned in the Jamboard. When the curriculum provided by the school is not enough, how will I respond as a critical and equitable educator? How will this text advance my students' learning of identity of themselves or other people's cultures? How will this text advance my students' learning of skills, intellects, criticality, and how do my selected texts agitate the oppressors of the world? There's a lot of marginalization based off family structure and experience. And that's something I think that sometimes we may forget about. And that's something to really think about and push back on in the classroom. What multimodal texts am I teaching with? Is the content and language of the book culturally authentic? What are the backgrounds of the writer and illustrator of the text? Is there a stronger author I could use to bring students closer to the content? So that connects a lot to the research I've done on adoption. Oftentimes, books on adoption are not written by adoptees, most often, actually. And so you're really getting a different perspective. So you really have to think about who's writing the text and whose perspective is being centered. How are students reading across genres and different literature and social studies, math, and science? Where do I find engaging and enabling texts? And how will I determine whether my students were engaged in the text that I selected? And here's just some places you could find texts or different types of texts. You can look in libraries, anthologies, primary sources, news articles, photographs, poetry, social media posts, digital text, artwork, blogs, short stories. And then here are some book lists with family children's literature that you could pull from. Okay.
We thought we would wrap up. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
I got too excited. So we thought we would wrap up with one example of a way you could partner books in your classroom that can be can be culturally sustaining and can engage in different kind of family structures, and even address some of that intersectionality. So the example we came up with was using interactive read-alouds, partner Last Stop on Market Street with the book Juliana's a Mermaid to highlight the various roles of grandparents and family structures. And in addition, this opens up some other elements of intersectionality. Both books represent urban settings. There are factors of race and language and socioeconomic class and gender. And in Juliana's a Mermaid, gender takes a role as well. And so there are a lot of foundation for conversation starters with these books, and pairing them together can allow students to see themselves in some aspects, see parts of their identities, and learn about aspects of the identities of others. So this is just one example we thought we'd leave you with.
Thanks so much for coming, and let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you guys very much. That was great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I'll put my email in the chat too. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you all. And thank you for your comments in the chat as well. They were wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm. Is it? Let's see. I think it's muted.
Oh, yep.
How would
I
you
see in the
suggest handling
chat.
pushing from a parent who doesn't want always representation? Great question. I think just being as transparent as possible and, building that trust, you still may get pushback about certain representations. And I think it's always just important to have, some just research to back it, to explain why it's important. And really, I think with the communications about this, like tagging in your school administrator is a good idea as well. And just being transparent with them up front about how you're about to teach the family unit. So for my dissertation, I'm going to pilot a new family unit in classrooms. And I think I'm just going to hold like a family meeting and just really explain all the different representations and ask if they have any questions, and be really transparent about the books that I'm going to read as well, because we know right now, in school systems, there's lots with, a lot of pushback on a lot of the texts that are being read. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. And I think just trying your best to just be as transparent as possible. It may not always work, but trying to get admin support as well is what I would suggest. Yeah. Bye. Have a great night. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes, thank you.